The book we are sharing today is called Know Can Do. The concept of knowing and doing means that while we may find it simple to know something, how do we actually manage to do it? This book is dedicated to studying this very question. The book has 3 authors, Ken Blanchard, Paul J. Meyer, and Dick Ruho. You might not be very familiar with the last 2, but the first author, Ken Blanchard, is a globally renowned management guru. His most famous book is called The New 1-Minute Manager. Although the book is very thin, it concisely explains the core essentials of being a manager. As a result, it has achieved astonishing sales of over 18 million copies and has been translated into more than 25 languages worldwide. Furthermore, Blanchard is a very versatile person. He is a writer, a speaker, and a business consultant, hailed as one of the most insightful and profound thinkers in the business world today. In 2005, he was named by Amazon as one of the top 25 best-selling authors of all time and was inducted into the Amazon Hall of Fame. As a master in corporate management and leadership, he often gives training and lectures on leadership methods and philosophies. He noticed a phenomenon. During every speech, many audience members would nod in agreement, thinking, "Yes, that's right, you've made a great point," but they would go back to their old ways without any change. He was puzzled. Why couldn't people apply the principles they knew? If knowing couldn't lead to doing, what was the point of his research into these management methods? To solve this problem, he reached out to his friend Paul J. Meyer, the second author of this book. Paul J. Meyer is also a powerhouse. The total global sales of his company's products have exceeded 2 billion. What his companies do is study how to motivate people. So, after hearing Blanchard's idea, Meyer said, "Come on, let me help you research this." With a master of business management and an expert in success, motivation collaborating on this project, what was the role of the third author, Ru? It turns out he is a professional speaker who promotes this concept. So Blanchard, Meyer, and Ruhe formed a team to specifically research and promote knowing and doing. That is, the problem of how to achieve the unity of knowledge and action. You see, this gap between knowing and doing is all too common in our lives. We read a book, attend a class, or get a shot of motivation, and suddenly we have a breakthrough. We decide to change, and even post an update on social media, working towards a better me. But in the end, we only find a more flawed version of ourselves. Why? We usually have reasons like these. One is a lack of perseverance. We start strong, but can't keep it up. We know what to do, but can't persist. Another reason might be that we haven't understood it thoroughly enough. An inadequate understanding makes execution difficult. Therefore, unifying knowledge and action is hard. We tend to attribute the no-do gap to 2 factors. 1, I don't have enough drive to act. I lack the perseverance to finish. And 2, my understanding is insufficient. I didn't fully grasp it. These points are quite valid, and they are correct. However, our authors say that the reason most people can't do what they know is that there is a huge gap in their thinking. A crucial link is missing between knowing and doing. What is that link? The authors say, the method is wrong. We always thought that after knowing something, the next step is to do it. If you can't do it well, it's either a problem with your understanding or your execution. But the authors say that knowing and doing are not directly connected. There is an intermediate step, the method. The entire process is not, first, knowing, and second, doing. It should be, first, knowing the principle, second, using the right method, and third, executing properly, which means doing. In the author's view, if the method is right, the problems of knowing and execution can be naturally resolved, as they are closely linked. So, what exactly is this method? The authors say it can be summed up in one word: repetition. Repetition, repetition. Repetition is the key method to get from knowing to doing. You might think, how can they study this for so long and only come up with the word repetition? It feels like nonsense. But hold on, you need to know that the author Blanchard has an amazing ability to extremely simplify complex problems. For example, when we talk about the work a manager needs to do, There may be countless factors and skills to master, but he was able to summarize it all in the best-selling book, The New 1-Minute Manager. For the issue of knowing and doing, he can even summarize it into one word: repetition. But the repetition the authors refer to is not just simple, tedious, repetitive practice. It is spaced repetition, repeating something at different intervals over time. Secondly, although this system of repetition is concise, it is backed by a whole set of supporting methods. For now, let's set aside the core keyword, repetition, and come back to it at the end. First, let's look at why we know but can't do. The author's research and analysis suggests there are three major problems: information overload, negative filtering, and lack of follow-up. If we can solve these three problems one by one, we can bridge the gap between knowing and doing. And by understanding the solutions to these three problems, you will also understand why repetition is the key to the entire method. Let's first look at the first reason: information overload. What is information overload? For example, we watch videos on YouTube, buy best-selling books, attend training classes, and constantly receive new knowledge, but it has actually exceeded our capacity to absorb. Everyone can relate to this. Why does this happen? It's because acquiring new knowledge is much more interesting than applying existing knowledge, so we habitually keep acquiring new knowledge. For instance, you are learning communication methods, but after learning the methods, you see something about how to read efficiently. At this point, you will definitely be more inclined to look into efficient reading. As for the communication methods, you feel that knowing them is enough. Why? Because we think, why should I waste time reviewing what I already know? Isn't that a waste of time? If there's new knowledge, I should learn it right away. This mindset actually leads to further information overload. It is precisely because we psychologically want to constantly learn new things that we are unable to truly learn anything. Why? Because we fail to realize one thing: the value of repeatedly reading or practicing knowledge we have already learned is immense. The understanding and cognition gained from each repetition or practice are completely different. However, we often only see the sense of accomplishment that comes from learning new things. Therefore, only by spending time to repeatedly study existing knowledge can we achieve a deeper cognition and understanding. But a problem arises. There are only 24 hours in a day, so where do we find the time? What should we do? The authors say we must adopt a less is more strategy. In other words, since we can't learn so many things, we should repeatedly study the knowledge that is truly important and essential. Why is it that we know so much, yet still can't live a good life? The reason is precisely that we know too much. What we need is to know less, but more deeply. For example, when listening to book summaries, what's important is not chasing the next new book summary, but repeatedly listening to the content that interests you. After listening, if you find it useful, it's best to buy the book and read it repeatedly. Only by spending time to continuously focus on the knowledge you already have, repeating and deepening your understanding, can you truly grasp the principles behind that knowledge. The author was once invited to give a speech to the management of a company. Before the speech, the company's president pulled him aside and said, "I've invited you here because I want you to reinforce what we've been repeating for years. Don't point us in a new direction." This had a profound impact on the author. Focusing energy on a few key things and repeating them over and over again is a very important realization. So, the first step from knowing to doing is to implement a less is more strategy to combat information overload, and to have the courage to spend time repeating what you already know. The second major obstacle preventing us from turning knowledge into action is negative filtering. What is negative filtering? Every time we learn a new piece of knowledge, hear a new concept, or read a new book, we are actually confronting our existing preconceptions, knowledge, and past habits and methods. This often invisibly hinders our enthusiasm and attitude toward learning new things. For example, staying with the topic of learning communication methods, there's a new piece of knowledge that says communication should start with listening to and understanding others before expressing your own opinion, so that both parties can better reach a consensus. However, your past experiences have taught you that if you are not assertive and strict with people, They won't take you seriously. Therefore, you must be more forceful, more proactive in expressing your views to have any chance of being truly respected. If you have had success with this approach, you will habitually question this new communication method. You'll think that spending so much time listening, understanding, and then communicating has a very high cost, and that it's better to just stick to your old ways. So, with this mindset, even if you know a new viewpoint or theory, you won't be able to actually put it into practice. How do we solve this problem? The author provides a very practical solution: green light thinking. What is green light thinking? When you hear someone propose any new idea or project suggestion, you should immediately think, why do I think this idea or suggestion is feasible? In other words, you should encourage everyone to accept the suggestion. This is quite different from our usual perception. Especially when we are more experienced and qualified in a certain matter, we are more likely to see the problems in others' opinions and completely dismiss their views. However, the truth is that every method and viewpoint proposed by others must have a reason behind it. There must be something that supports their proposal. It's just that our fixed mindsets, preconceived biases, and past successful experiences have constrained and blinded us, preventing us from thinking from others' perspectives. Green light. Thinking helps us find others' reasons. This act of finding others' reasons is equivalent to opening a new perspective for us. Then we will discover that although something seems problematic from my point of view, from another angle, it actually makes sense, an angle I would have never thought of before. Therefore, the author suggests that whenever we encounter a new viewpoint, we should not always question and ponder where it is wrong. We should use green light thinking to first actively acknowledge its feasibility. For example, on the topic of communication, even if you strongly disagree in your heart, you tell yourself that understanding before communicating is useful. The reasons are: 1. After understanding others, we can discuss on the same topic, avoiding the common situation where we talk for a long time only to find out we were not talking about the same thing, thus saving a lot of time and energy. 2. The process of understanding before communicating can also create a better emotional atmosphere and environment, making it easier for both parties to reach a consensus. When you find these reasons, you are more likely to draw useful things from the new knowledge to change your own behavior. So, the author advises us that when we hear a new viewpoint, we should change our first reaction from questioning to asking ourselves, how can I use this? What will I gain if I learn this? By consistently thinking this way, we will become what the author calls a reverse paranoid. We know a paranoid person stubbornly clings to existing thoughts, while a reverse paranoid consistently uses positive thinking to spark all kinds of creative ideas. But at this point, someone might say, this goes against my true feelings. There are clear problems, and you're not letting me point them out. Is it really right to only talk about the good points? The author says, don't worry. It's not that you're not allowed to question, but that the questioning phase is placed in the yellow light phase, which comes after the green light. What is the yellow light for? It's the phase for expressing your doubts about the issue. So, it's not that we can't express dissent, but that before giving any negative feedback, we must first give positive feedback. At that point, when you raise your objections, others will also take them more seriously. The author says that sometimes, when we focus so much on actively seeking possibilities, by the time the yellow light comes on, we can't think of any objections. This way, we fully understand the issue, and execution becomes easier. Therefore, negative thinking is the second problem, hindering us from moving from knowing to doing. The third problem affecting the transition from knowing to doing is called lack of follow-up. What is lack of follow-up? It means that even if you know a method, for example, you know that in communication you should first understand and listen before expressing your own opinion. But after a while, the most likely outcome is that life goes on as usual, and you revert to your old habitual way of communicating. Everyone must have had similar experiences. Why? The author says this is due to a lack of follow-up. There is a very important misconception here. We think that to take an action or change ourselves, the most important thing is to have new knowledge, master new methods, and have new concepts, and that this will solve our problems. Wrong. It's not that knowing new concepts is bad. But what's more important than knowing a new concept is spending time to master it. You see, companies are willing to spend days or even weeks on training for their employees, hoping that after these training courses, employees will be able to master new methods and apply them in their work to create greater value for the company. That's why companies are willing to spend the money to send you for training. But what is the reality? The reality is that after the training, the actual changes that happen in most employees are very few. Why are we willing to spend so much time experiencing and learning new knowledge and methods, but are unwilling to spend even a little bit of time following up on the application of that knowledge afterwards? In fact, knowing something is just the first step of a long journey. The follow-up after turning that knowledge into action is the real battlefield. The author says that if you spend 1 unit of time on training, you need to spend 10 times the effort and time on follow-up. But which company, which person will still invest a lot of effort after training to track whether everyone has understood the knowledge correctly? What problems are they encountering in execution? What kind of support do they need? None. We expect that after attending classes, finishing training, participating in interactive experiences, and having positive interactions with the teacher, our lives should change. Can they change? No, they can't. Back in our daily lives, we are surrounded by our usual work, life environment, and routines, and we easily revert to our normal state. Although we know there is a new method, a good method, we still can't use it in our lives. In fact, even if our mindset has changed and our knowledge has changed, if we don't repeatedly invest in follow-up, we still can't solve the problem of getting from knowing to doing. And this is the truly important and most difficult part. The author says a good follow-up system has at least 3 parts: guidance, support, and accountability. That is, there is enough guidance to tell you how to do it. Support is given during the process with constant feedback and help. And finally, there is accountability, where good performance is motivated and praised, and poor performance receives feedback for improvement. A while ago, I read another book, something like The 4 Disciplines of Execution. The title sounded a bit like a self-help book, and I initially thought it was flimsy, but after reading it, I found it to be excellent. It's also a book from Stephen Covey's company. It mentioned a method of using a dashboard model to provide feedback for the team. What does that mean? It means that each team's performance and metrics should be presented in the simplest way possible on a single page. It's like a basketball game. If everything about the game remained the same, but there was no scoreboard and the score was kept secretly without everyone knowing, the entire basketball game would immediately lose its tension and intensity. But when there is a scoreboard that everyone can see, everyone's abilities are mobilized. It's such a simple principle and method. Using this method, I designed a 1-page dashboard for our company. It sounds very simple. It's just a 1-page sheet listing our project schedule. Then, every day, team members just need to record their actual work progress by placing a dot on the chart. Every day, each team member just places a dot, and the whole company knows the actual progress of each project, making resource coordination and arrangement much faster. When I introduced this method to everyone in a meeting, they all thought it was great, very intuitive, and very useful. But during the first week of implementation, problems were everywhere. Some people had different interpretations of the project schedule. Some didn't know where the most appropriate place to put the dot was, and some thought maybe they didn't need to do it every day, so they just didn't. You see, for something as simple as placing a dot, almost everyone had a different understanding of it. At that moment, I remembered what was mentioned in the book, Know Can Do. If it takes 1 unit of time to teach a team a piece of knowledge, it takes 10 times the time to follow up and provide support for the team to truly apply it. We spent a full 2 weeks to finally align the consensus across the entire team, reach a new understanding and standard, and get this 1-page dashboard implemented. Just think about it. Something as simple as putting a dot on a piece of paper required half a month to gradually get everyone to reach a consensus and take unified action. This was both unexpected and logical. And this is precisely a major pitfall that most of us fall into on the path from knowing to doing. We always think that knowing things is important, and we spend a lot of time learning new knowledge and understanding new methods, but we don't set aside enough time or even realize that we need to put in much greater effort to repeatedly practice and apply what we've learned, to turn what we know into what we can do. To summarize, the 3 problems that affect the unity of knowledge and action are information overload, negative filtering, and lack of follow-up. The corresponding solutions are essentialism, green light thinking, and consistent follow-up. After understanding these methods, we can now go back to what we said at the beginning, the 2-word summary from the authors: repetition. It becomes much easier to understand. Essentially, when you learn a new piece of knowledge, you need to repeatedly understand it, repeatedly study it, and repeatedly explore it, researching it essentially and deeply. And in this process, you repeatedly practice, repeatedly follow up, repeatedly improve on the problems you encounter, and repeatedly seek support. Therefore, the authors believe that if this entire set of methods must be summarized, it can only be the word repetition. It's just spaced repetition, repeating at different levels and different stages. And spending time on repetition is the key to getting us from knowing to doing. The content above represents the core ideas of the book. Now can do. The solution to information overload is essentialism. The solution to negative filtering is green light thinking. And the solution to lack of follow-up is consistent follow-up. If we think about these 3 solutions, they actually correspond to changing cognition, changing attitude, and then changing behavior. So, cognition, attitude, and behavior are actually the foundation of the action change theory. They form the most basic research model for generating new behaviors. Once you understand this, you will realize that the author's method for getting from knowing to doing is also based on this very simple model. Building on this, we can also see that at the cognitive change level, the author's strategy for solving information overload is essentialism. And with green light thinking, it's clear how the author proposes we shift our cognition to think from others' perspectives. In the past, we were always told, you need to consider things from others' points of view, you need to have empathy. But the author doesn't say it that way. Instead, he gives us a tool. The green light telling you that you must find reasons, forcing you to find them. Transforming a problem from knowing a concept to using a tool like the green light can also create a significant change in the way it's executed. This also gives us great inspiration on how to package a concept into a tool for better application. Finally, at the action level, the methods mentioned by the author, guidance, support, and accountability, do they not share a similar essence with the cue routine reward system mentioned in the book, The Power of Habit? At the very least, there are many similarities. In fact, they are all closely related to the formation of behavioral neural pathways in our brain. A neural pathway needs to be activated repeatedly, stimulated repeatedly, to make that channel smoother, thus continuously producing a behavior. After understanding all this, we will no longer be puzzled about why we've learned so much and know so much, yet still can't live a good life. We should know a little less, a little more essentially, practice a little more repetitively, dig a little deeper, and have systematic follow-up. This way, we can achieve, if you know it, you must do it. If you do it, you must get results.